Hello and welcome to my first tutorial. I've been asked to do a tutorial showing how I do a afterthought heel. Now there are lots of tutorials out there, so my style may not necessarily suit you. This tutorial is also going to assume that you know how to knit a sock. It will just be about the heel. So I will link a couple of videos down below, sort of beginner sock tutorials, and if you need any extra help, that's where to look for it. I'm hoping the camera is capturing everything I need to do. I've had to set it up rather oddly so that I can see the screen at an angle to see that you can see what I'm doing, which might mean it's upside down. I might have to flip it. We'll see how this goes. It's trial and error. Okay, first of all, what is an afterthought heel and why would you use it? Well, this is an afterthought heel. It's a heel that's added after you've finished the rest of the sock. This is the sock of mine. I have worn it. It has not been washed. I apologise. As you can see here, it's fabulous for using on a sock that has a striped pattern because it does not interrupt the stripes. It's equally easy to use with a toe up sock or a cuff down sock. You simply need to know, sorry, that was one of Dave's hairs, what length you need your foot to be. I'll explain all of that in a minute. It's also very good if you are knitting from a sock tube, whether you've knit it yourself or whether you've bought it, because you can just measure where you want your heel and your toe to go. We're just covering the afterthought heel in this tutorial. So this is how our sock is going to look. I'm hoping you can see I used a red so that you would be able to see them. I have marked where I'm going to cut into this sock with these 3 light bulb markers. So the first thing you need to know is where to put those. I'm going to put those in and then cut the thread. Don't panic. So from here to here will be the length of my leg, and from here to here will be the length of my foot plus the heel. So in this case, this is a sock that I've knit cuff down, and I've knit its partner to the same leg length. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you this terribly well, but I'm at the same place on both socks. So now I'm going to put the stitch markers in. If I were knitting toe up, the calculation is a little bit more tricky. So you would need to know the overall length of the foot. So this whole length from toe to heel. For my sock, I know that I need to allow 2 inches, 5 centimetres for the heel and 5 centimetres for the toe. So I want a sock that in total, from the tip of the heel to the tip of the toe, is 23.5 centimetres. So, for example, if I had knit this toe up, I would measure from here and I would take 5 centimetres off 24.5. So I would knit 19.5 centimetres and then put in my markers. If I'm knitting cuff down, I'll knit the leg to the length I want, as I have done here. Then I'll put in my markers, and then in order to knit to the correct position to put in the toe, I'll take off 5 centimetres for the toe, 5 centimetres for the heel, and so I'll knit the foot between those 2 points to 14.5 centimetres. But we're not talking about toes today. This sock already has a toe and it's been knit cuff down. Had I knit it cuff up, I would have knit it to the length that I need for Dave's foot, which I think is 27 centimetres, minus 5.5, 6 centimetres. There's a difference which I will explain in a minute. But the easiest way is to do it cuff down, and then you only need to know how long you want your leg. So, how do I put in the markers? Well, I'm knitting this on a 9-inch circular. The process is the same whatever way you're knitting your socks. This is a 64 stitch sock, and my heel needs to go across half those stitches, so 32 stitches. So I've knit the first stitch, and all I'm going to do is put my first marker into that stitch, so it's gone into between the V, and I'm marking it, and I'm counting that as stitch number 1, and I'm going to count across roughly half my stitches. So I'm going to knit to 16, 2, 3, so that's my 16th stitch. That's halfway across, and I'm just going to do the same thing again. Pop my light bulb marker into that stitch so that it's in the stitch, not around the stitch. And then I'm going to knit another 16 stitches to give me my 32. At this point, it's always worth checking that you've got the right number of stitches. So I'm just going to count from that first one, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23, no, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32. That was my dyscalculia coming into play. Okay. So I have 32 stitches, they are marked. I can forget about them now and just carry on knitting the rest of the sock until I get to where I want to put in the toe, which we're not worrying about today. I'm just going to close the blind because the sun is about to get in the way and stop us seeing what we're doing. That's better, I think. I hope it's not too dark. Okay. It's going to wobble about now. Why does everything have to be difficult? Let's put the lamp on. Can I reach? As you can see, tutorials are no less chaotic than ordinary podcasts. Right, let's move that out of the way. We don't need to worry about that anymore. So, now comes the scary bit. In order to get the heel into this sock, we're going to have to cut it. There are 2 ways of doing this. You can just cut it and then pick up your stitches. However, I am not that insane. So I like to pick up my stitches before I cut anything. Whoop. And I'm not going to do it on a 9-inch needle because I'm going to be decreasing, and it's just, I find it too difficult. So I've got a longer cable needle that I'm going to use magic loop. It is the same size, it's 2.25, the same size as the 9-inch cable that the sock was knit on. So what I need to do now is pick up the stitches either side of the row that I've got marked there. So I've managed to get that one in 2 stitches. Okay, so let's pick up. Sorry about the sound of the cable rubbing. You don't need to count them, you can if you want to as you go across. But the important thing to check is that when you get to your next marker, so I don't know if you can see, I'm picking up every other leg. So I'm trying to get the right leg. Whoop. I'm picking up every other one. And what I want to be sure of is that when I get here to my next marker, I've not picked up the row that the mark is in. I've not picked up too far past it. I've picked up the row exactly below it. So I'm going to carry on doing that all the way across until I get to my next marker. This is made considerably easier if, like this yarn, you've got a stripe all of the same colour. It requires a little bit more care and attention if you're doing it on a heavily variegated yarn or a plain yarn that's got no striping or colouring at all. Okay, and then when you get to this marker, you do the same thing. You check that you are below it, not on the same row. You want to be on the row just below it. And then I'm going to check again that I have 32 stitches. You can't go wrong if you keep double checking. Now I've got 33, so one of these stitches does not belong here. We'll figure it out on the other side. So what I've done is flip the needle so that now the side that's not got picked up stitches is closest to me, and I'm going to pull that through until those stitches are on the cable. It makes it much easier to pick up the stitches on the other side if your stitches on your first side are on the cable. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing again, making sure that I start underneath this stitch. I'm going to pick up the right leg of each stitch as I go across. Before I get too far, can you see that between the cable and the needle is a row with the markers in that I haven't touched, because that's the row we're going to cut out. Bear with me while I pick up the rest of the stitches. Double checking again that I am on the row below that stitch marker, not the row that the stitch marker is in. Okay, double checking my count again. have 32. So I think the stitch that I've got that I don't need is this first one on my first needle, so I'm just going to pop that off like that. Okay, so I've pulled both needles so that the stitches are held on the cables, and you can see, I hope, that the cables run either side of that centre row. I haven't got any of those centre row stitches, and I haven't got anything below this row or above this row. It doesn't matter which side you pick up first. Whether you pick up the leg side or the foot side makes absolutely no difference, because this is a symmetrical heel. So it will come out exactly the same whichever side you've started with. Now comes the scary bit. So I'm going to pull this centre marker, and I'm going to take this little pair of scissors and I'm going to snip one leg of that stitch. Take my marker out. Now I need a needle or something pokey. What I'm going to do to make it easier for myself is put my hand inside, and then, trying to make sure that you can see what I'm doing, I'm just going to go along and I'm going to pull that stitch out all the way along. All the way across to this side. This is the scariest bit. Snipping that stitch is quite nerve-wracking the first few times you do it, but if you've got this centre marker in and you pull it up, you can be 99.99% certain that you are only cutting the stitch that you want to. You're not cutting through the other side of the sock. You're not cutting the stitches either side of that row that you want held on your cables. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpick this, not quite as far as the stitch that the marker is on. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So that marker is still on the last stitch, and I'm going to unpick it to the stitch before that. Just pull that through there. So that last stitch is still being held. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So finding my loose thread and just pulling it out. It's easier if you use a darning needle or another knitting needle to do this. You need something small enough to get into that stitch, because you don't want to be pulling on your live stitches and sort of messing up the tension of what you've already knit. I'm doing the same thing on this side. Sorry, I keep turning my hand so that I can see, and then I realise that you can't. I'm going to pull these out until I get to the very last stitch. That might be a bit hard for you to see, that's quite dark. So I've left the last stitch held on there. So if we look at the sock now, we've got two loose threads and an opening. Let me put this away before I lose it. So if I were to put this onto a sock blocker now, you would be able to see that the opening we've got is going to form the heel. So if I do it that way, it's a bit So what we're going to do now is fill in this gap, and it's done exactly the same way as you knit a wedge toe. If the wedge toe isn't what you typically use, this might be a bit more complicated for you, but the wedge toe and the Afterthought heel are exactly the same. They are exactly the same thing. So I'm going to knit this heel in exactly the same way as I've knit the toe. First of all, I'm going to take out one of these markers. Doesn't matter which one, again, because it's going to be a symmetrical toe. I'm leaving the other one in just so I can see where my beginning around is. And this, I'm just going to leave out the way. This one I need for a second. With this sock, with most socks that I put an Afterthought heel into, I use a contrasting yarn. You can, of course, use the same yarn. Particularly with striped socks, that looks quite nice because what you get is a bullseye because of the way the heel's constructed. So that can be quite cute. I'll put him over there in Yorick. And then all I'm going to do, just to stop these going anywhere, is I'm going to put a slip knot around this. And then slide that up there. Then I'm going to take those two and I'm going to hold them in my left hand for a minute. And now, for Dave's sock, before I start the decreasing, I knit 6 rounds plain. For my own sock, I knit 4 rounds plain. So this sock is for Dave. So I'm going to knit 6 rounds. And I'm just going to knit them in the exact same way as I would normally. You may find that your stitches, some of them might be the wrong way round. If they are, it's not a problem. Just straighten them as you go. The other thing I'm doing as I go is I'm weaving in these ends. So with each stitch, I'm holding them up so that they get caught by the yarn, pulling them down. Hold them down for the next stitch, up for the next stitch, down for the following stitch. And I'm going to do that probably all the way across. And that will then mean that they're woven in. Dave won't feel them. In this case, because of where I've started to knit, they're going to be under his foot, so they will probably just felt in when he wears them. I'm going to stop that there because I'm getting short of one of the yarns and I don't want the tail to end up poking through. I'll trim them later, just make them a bit more tidy. So that's my first side, and I'm going to come around. I'm going to tuck those ends from my first side just down into the foot. Rearrange my needles to do the second side. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with the tail from this half of the sock. I'll just knit the first stitch and then start lifting it up, holding it down, lifting it up, holding it down. Whoop, I dropped a stitch. I missed him, I think. Up, down, up, down, This is similar to the Weaving Stephen, if you're familiar with that. This is how I was taught to do it, quite possibly before Stephen West was born, truth be told. I am a lot older than I look, apparently, and I've woven ends in this way all my knitting life, which is over half a century. I've tried Weaving Stephen. I find I don't get quite as good a result. It's probably just because this is what I'm used to. I'm not going to torture you by making you watch me knit the whole heel, but I was just doing that so I can show you, I think. I don't know if you can see that there's barely any noticeable end to feel there. Same on the other side. You can see it a bit better on the other side because there's two ends, the sock end and the heel end. But yeah, he won't feel that, and it will felt in. So then all I do is I knit 6 rounds, and then I start my decreasing. And when I decrease, let me finish this round and I will show you. Again, I'm presuming you know how to do a wedge toe. I'm going to cover it briefly, but I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing because nobody has time for that. So that's the first row on the heel. And I'm going to tuck that end up the leg so that now I can just work on with my heel. There are no ends to weave in when I've finished, unless I want to just secure the very end. I'll just trim them probably. So what I'm going to do with the heel, as I have done with the toe, is knit my 6 rounds plain, and then I will knit 1 decreasing round, 1 plain round, in my case until I get to 14 stitches. Other people may vary. 14 stitches works for both of us. Some people prefer more, some people less. If you're going to leave more stitches at the end, you may find that you need to increase the number of plain rows because your toe will be shorter. Ideally, you want about 2 inches, 5 centimetres. So bear that in mind. If you're going to leave, say, 20 rather than 14, you might want to add another 3 plain rounds before you start decreasing. And then you're going to knit a decreasing round, slip, slip, knit, knit to the other side. Sorry, knit 1, then slip, slip, knit, knit to the other side, 3 stitches before the end of this side, knit 2 together, knit 1, flip it around, same on the other side, knit 1, slip, slip, knit, knit 3 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 1, flip it back and knit a plain round. And just keep doing that until you've got the number of stitches left that you want, and then you're going to kitchener them together. Again, I will try and find a tutorial for kitchenering the toe and the heel because it is exactly the same. And I might see if I can find a wedge toe tutorial. People to look for are Crazy Sock Lady, Denise at Earth Tones Girls, and Ellie from Craft House Magic. They all do very good sock tutorials, very simple, easy to follow instructions. This may not be quite as simple and easy to follow as it could have been, but I was just asked how I do an afterthought heel, and that's how I do it. There is another way to do it, which is more commonly called a forethought heel, where instead of putting in your markers, as we did on this row here, what you would do is drop your yarn and knit in a piece of spare yarn for those, in my case, 32 stitches. Then you'd carry on with your own yarn, and then when it comes to picking up your stitches, your spare yarn, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not spare, this is why I'm hesitating, the word's gone. Waste yarn. Your waste yarn, pick something that's entirely different to your sock, and then you can't accidentally pick up the wrong stitches. And you've got nothing to cut. You pick up your stitches and then you just pull that waste yarn out. That's a bit too, a bit lacking in jeopardy for me. I prefer to go this way. So, in all seriousness, this is the first heel that I learnt to knit, and so I'm more comfortable doing it this way. I have tried it with waste yarn, but I find that I get a gap at the end. The gap at the end is why I left the last stitch on either side of the excuse me, I think I just swallowed a fly. The last stitch on the end of where I unpick the yarn, it's to prevent the hole. That stitch will prevent there being a little gap. Alternatively, you can leave weaving it in as you go, and then if you do have a little gap, you can just give it a pull and close it up as you weave the ends in with your needle. Words are escaping me now. This is an excellent tutorial when the person running it can't remember what words are called. Sewing. When you're sewing in your ends, if you've got a little gap, you can close it up. But I find that if I have got a gap, where I've left these ends a little bit longer, I can just very carefully pull on it and it will close up that gap. So even though I've woven them in, there's a little bit of give and I can close up the gap, should there be one. Anyway, I'm not going to knit the whole heel, because as I understood the question, it was how do I put them in rather than the actual knitting of them. So I hope that answered your question. It was longer than I intended it to be. I do apologise. And you never know, I might actually have a full pair of socks to show you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.